Hello and welcome to Personable, a podcast focused on speaking to the world's best, enabling you to become the best that you can be. My name is HarveyBracken-Smith, and today I'm honoured to be joined by Anthony Cheung. Anthony is the Chief Content and Culture Officer at AmplifyME, and he's also the former Head of Markets Analysis at Newsquawk. I actually met Anthony a couple of years ago at one of the AmplifyME trading shops at Eton College, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I kind of looked up at him as I had no idea what was going on with the trading analysis. But he seemed like the mastermind behind everything. So I think I went up to him at the end and got him on LinkedIn. I don't know if he remembers any of this, but I kind of looked in admiration. Now, many years later, I'm interning in sales and trading at Goldman Sachs and have kind of, looked up to Anthony as one of the great financial speakers in the field. Anthony, just before I come to, specific questions, I actually wanted to read something to you and I wanted to get your reaction to it. And this is actually pinned to your LinkedIn profile. And as I'm sure was a very meaningful moment for you, but I wanted to start off there. So your LinkedIn post reads, "Right now, I'm in New York, about to work with one of the world's largest hedge funds. But where I'm from, that kind of sentence doesn't get said very often. Most people at my state school didn't even go to university, let alone end up in finance. No family in the industry, no secret playbook, just curiosity, graft, and figuring things out one step at a time. So being here feels like a full circle moment, not because of the skyline, but because of what it represents. That you can come from a normal working class background and still get through the door, that you don't need the perfect CV to belong in this world. So if you're just starting out and it feels out of reach, I promise you it isn't. Stay in the game, keep learning, keep showing up." What does that mean to you?
God, it's getting me emotional right at the beginning, Harvey. How dare you? But yeah, it means a lot, actually. I can't help but get emotional hearing you read that out. I mean, I wrote it, obviously, but hearing it read out like that is, it still hits home. It means a lot because I think that talent is everywhere, but access to opportunity is not. I think I very much built that mindset and philosophy out of playing a lot of sport, which I know that you do too, where I think as long as you can access it, it's a pretty level playing field. And then, you can really make yourself what you will through hard work and consistency and having the right attitude. And so, when I went to school, like I said, I think I caught up with a few students from my high school, and I think the stat is about 7% of people go to university. So it's low. I remember when I was young, I had a letter. I don't know why they selected me, but I was playing a decent level of sport and stuff like that at the time. But I got a letter from the Royal Marines to join the Marines when I was about 15, 16. And then my career advisor at school, we sat like a very rudimentary test, like a questionnaire. And it said I should be a bricklayer, of all things. And I was like, okay, I think that's slightly warped the questionnaire in terms of the horizons that we're shooting for with the school that I attended. But I think a lot of the attributes that I mentioned at the end of that post, I think really hold true and is a message I really want to say to all students, even students who are not from my background. Like you said, you and I met at Eton. So, people come from different places. But actually, in a world where people are aspiring to work in finance, where there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of expectation. That's the same for everyone. And actually, at the end, I think securing these jobs, a lot of it comes down to consistent hard work, which not a lot of people have. I always think, like with sport, and like you've probably seen, talent gets you so far. It's actually hard work and consistency, turning up every day, giving it your everything, that really can see you get, to the top. So it was weird. Working with the world's largest hedge fund from where I started was not something that I even registered, was even on my radar. But being there in New York, in the Rockefeller with this hedge fund was a bit of a full circle moment. And I was sat there with a former Federal Reserve central bank member talking to these students. And it was like, wow, I was covering research about this guy 20 years ago. And now I'm sat with him. It was, quite surreal.
It's interesting because my girlfriend's the year below me at Duke. And I think there's like a Duke Amplify with, I think it's like IMC trading or something at the moment or coming up soon. And I mentioned I was doing a podcast with you. And she was like, oh my God, really? With Amplify? And like she looks at it and just thinks it's the most insane thing. Because something that I've learned over time with this podcast is exactly like you with the member of the Fed, is that when you get associated with incredible people that don't know who you are, or even people that know who you are, sort of put you on their playing field. So by you being associated with that hedge fund, not only for the emotions that you felt, but also the association to it, in some little part of our brain, it tells us, okay, Anthony is on the same level of that hedge fund. And so people look up to you. What I think is really interesting from my perspective, having kind of seen you in a position of knowledge, because I had no idea what trading was kind of before I had that initial meeting with you, to the point where I'm at now, still trying to learn as much as I can, is when you look at people in positions of power, authority, knowledge, etc., there's kind of a presumption that they have more knowledge than you, that they're better than you, that they know something that you don't know. And so when you got from that point of being in the school that you were in to, only 7% of people getting into university at all, let alone a good one, let alone working in high finance, you get through that, right? But why did you want to give back? I know it's an emotional moment working with one of the world's greatest hedge funds, but I feel like a lot of people in that minority that would make it would be, I made it, family, friends, look at me, I made it. But you have this mission to give back. And this is something I've kind of noticed on your podcast and also with what you wanted to talk to today. So could you talk about why your North Star is not only success in your own life, but also giving back to students and people from your own background and others?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks for asking. I think it's twofold. I think one, I've got a chip on my shoulder. I think having when you're going to pursue something like high finance, like you said, it's a tough slog. You've either got to have a chip on your shoulder or you've got to be one of those kind of strange people that likes to run, do an Ironman or something like that. Like if you're really going to make it, you've got to be wired a certain way because it has a certain demand on you. And coming from the background that I had and as I've gone through my career, and I never knew I was different, by the way, until I started really working with lots of sell-side investment banks and things like that. And you're like, wow, actually, there's not that many of us, that come from a similar sort of stories. I think a lot of that is I started with a big chip on my shoulder. I was like, right, I'll make a difference. I want to lift up people like myself. As I've gone through my career and I've spent more time with people of a different background, I've learned to actually appreciate that the burden of stress and expectation is just as equal on the other side of that spectrum. If you have a mum or dad that was an MD at a big bank and stuff like that, and they put you in a top school, there's a lot of pressure to deliver. And I don't think I quite understood that. So I think that now that I'm in a position where people are open to listening to what I say and I can share from some of my experiences, I also, always try to pride myself in being totally transparent and honest, which is something I don't think young people get enough access to, chiefly because I think a lot of people who work in big organizations are just simply not allowed to kind of say certain things for their own personal reputations and careers. And so, I just want to give people that visibility. The second part is more, and I was thinking about this the other day because someone asked me a similar sort of question. So my mother was a nurse. My dad moved to the UK when he was 18 from Hong Kong, and he worked in a hospital as a porter. And so my parents have always served people in society. That's been their role. My brother obviously grew up alongside me. It's a very similar sort of lifestyle. And then he runs this fabulous initiative called Work in FinTech, where he tries to lift lower social mobile people introducing into the world of FinTech. I think between him and I, we've always had this thing, which was a mirror of the childhood that we had. I mean, I grew up actually in a rest home. My mother was the matron. So all I saw was my parents helping other people. That was the default. Because like you said at the top of the show, no one was a professional. So everyone worked in jobs that were service-based specifically. So I think that probably left a mark, I would say. So that's how I kind of think about it when I self-reflect.
I think going back to my own childhood, I'm not going to pretend my parents had a rags to riches story, but they definitely didn't go to what would be the normal caliber of top universities or top schools that are often the segue into these top banks. And I remember when I went to Eton, coming from the little island of Jersey, and I'm sure people will listen to this and be, Jersey, tax haven, stuff like that. What is he talking about? But I very much went from a big fish in a small pond, like higher academic sets, being better at sport, sort of like a small fish in like a massive pond. And I definitely faced some imposter syndrome in my own life in terms of just navigating Eton life. And that kind of lasted for a couple of years. The reason I mentioned that is something I was exposed to was something called the Society Program, where I would hear from world-famous speakers like past prime ministers, presidents, CEOs, and founders. The reason I mention that is I also had that imposter syndrome, and I also thought that these people are amazing, right? They've all done incredible things, but I can never be like them. And if I'm in an environment of Eton, which is often known as one of the greatest schools on the planet, surrounded, very academically selective, and yet I'm still thinking that it's impossible for me to go about achieving my dreams, I can't imagine what it's like with a 1% of those resources. And so when I kind of had spoken and heard from enough people, I realized that these people were human and that if they can do it, I can do it too. The reason I tell that story is I think your message of telling people that you can do it too is it's not this like, oh, you can do it too, I got to this point, you can do it too. But it actually should be this empowering thing that with the right resources, with the right level of willpower, with the right determination, by speaking to the right people, by learning the right things, it's possible for anyone to do it. And I know this is like a particularly hard job market, particularly in high finance, but I definitely think that there is an element to which if you never believe that you can do it, you won't. You have to be very intentional about it. And so I wanted to mention that. You were also, not also, I mean, I'm not, but you played sports to a very high level. You won 4 straight titles as a youth basketball player. What was that transition like from playing sport at a high level in your youth? And how did those skills transfer over to trading?
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea they would transfer, to be honest. It's a big part of why I'm so passionate about AmplifyMe and the business that we operate now, which is all built really fundamentally at the core to measure someone's performance over their background. So when I played sport, I started playing basketball from the age of, 7, something like that, and then played it pretty much full time was my daily lifestyle up until the age of, I would say, 16 or so. I think what I learned from that fundamentally was probably that, look, I'm on a screen here and you can see probably my head or hear my voice, but I'm not a big guy. I'm like 6 foot and I weigh about 11 stone, so I'm pretty slim Jim. And so when it came to basketball, you can imagine when I was 12 years old playing at a national level, I was like 5 foot nothing. I was fast, but still,
I love how
playing in a game.
The new short for everyone listening. If you're not 6 foot, you're short. I guess it's basketball, but
exactly, yeah. I had to work out, I think, when I played basketball pretty quickly, that I needed to find some sort of edge to succeed. And it was never going to be physicality. My dad is 5 foot tall. My mother, thankfully, was 5'10", so go figure how those two met each other. But so I kind of wash out in the middle there somewhere. But what it meant was that I think I just learned how to outwork other people very early on from a training perspective. So I think fundamentally, from a technical perspective in my game, I was very sound. I would be the attitude of first in the gym, last out. These were all things that meant that I excelled early on very quickly. And so I was able to get into these teams very early on. That allowed me then to play at a higher level when then you start transitioning, as I'm sure you've done, where it's no longer about so much having fun. It starts to become quite serious, as in the winning actually really matters. And so therefore it starts taking on a slightly different level of interaction with it from a daily basis. You're training to win rather than have fun. And certainly when you're a kid, that's quite a difference, because a lot of the time you don't want to train. I used to hate going on a Sunday. I'd have to travel for hours to go somewhere, and you train, and you're hours back, and you're like, I don't really want to do it, but you do it because you know it has to be done, sort of thing. And so I say all this because the transition there from a work ethic, I think, is absolutely true when it comes to working in the early jobs that I had in finance, which was, I certainly wasn't the most intellectually capable. I was a quick thinker, so I could pick things up through visual. Shadowing someone and watching someone and mimicking someone was something I was very good at. Because when you play sport, that's how you try to learn, through observation of watching other good people. But the academic stuff was the real struggle. But what I came to found very quickly early in my career was that most people haven't got all that other stuff. They've never been in a situation of high pressure. They've never been in a situation where it's critical to communicate and articulate super clearly, really fast, make quick decisions. And ultimately, one of the biggest ones, they've never really lost in life. They've never really experienced the ups and downs, the wins, the losses, your ability to bounce back, become resilient. These are all, I think, critical skills for life success. And none more so in finance, where there's a lot on the line, there's a lot of pressure, a lot of competition. So once you got over the hump, which was a high hump for me, of the technical acquisition of knowledge, I already had all those other assets that it seemed was actually harder for most other people to learn, I'd say. And then the other thing is, I had a brutal coach for many, many years. He was a former army drill sergeant. The guy used to beast us. I mean, we would train without a ball for some sessions. So it'd be 2-hour training sessions playing basketball without a ball. So these were just fitness sessions and you'd get beasted, basically. So I was very good at taking instruction, let's say. That's a polite way of putting it. If someone needed to tell me I wasn't doing something right, or they required me to do something differently, they could tell me and I could execute it. I had no problem with that at all. And not a lot of people were used to that, I don't think. Markets 20 years ago was quite a different place than what it is today from that perspective of culturally. And that also helped me a lot, I think.
I actually think there's kind of like the extremes have been pushed quite a lot from my perspective. Correct me if I'm wrong, in that there's kind of like, in terms of trading, kind of the quant traders. So they've got like, math Olympians, PhDs, super intelligent, super technical, super like in the weeds of like what's going on. But then on the other hand, for sales and trading, what I'm doing, something interesting that I found is prior to sort of recruiting and kind of going through that 4 or 5 month cycle, I kind of thought that there would be a checklist of things to learn. I'd have to know like really deep things about like specific things about like derivatives and things like that. But I actually learned over time that the number one thing that enabled people to be successful, aside from purely like networking and having a general knowledge of the markets, was actually the soft skills of like, are you coachable? Do you ask good questions? Making sure you never lie. Like, do you have a good moral compass? Are you someone that they'd want around? Obviously, for roles like this, you've got to have like high grades and good clubs and stuff like that. But they've kind of like got so many people applying that already have that as a baseline. A lot of it comes down to the morals. And that's something which I think a lot of kids, and even I to an extent, still take for granted, because you look at things like being coachable, asking good questions, admitting when you're wrong, and thinking that's an easy thing to do. But actually doing it in practice day in, day out is actually a thing that not a lot of people do. So the people that do it, when your word is actually your bond in business, it goes so far. And I think that's something that's really appreciated in this business. And so all the things that you're talking about with regard to basketball and being coachable and trainable and hardworking and doing it even when you don't want to do it, to a listener, they might be like, I thought we're talking about like trading at the biggest firms in the world. It's interesting how, you can do it too, right? Like these are things that you can sort of train and put into yourself. So on that point, right, so you get into more trading, and then eventually you transition into Amplify. Could you talk a little bit about what Amplify does and how your role has transitioned over time to what you're doing now?
Yeah, so Amplify, so a lesson here for anyone listening in networking. So the two founders of Amplify, they founded the business in 2009. I was in my other career at that point. They were actually my clients. So they were working for a big US proprietary trading firm here in London. And my voice and my team used to be what would come out on a tannoy on their trading floor. That was the job that I did. So I'd known them for maybe, 8 years before I then actually went to work for them. And for anyone who's young and applying to firms thinking, oh my goodness, we have to go through this arduous application cycle, I got that job through having a beer and then was offered a job the next day. So, it's not always going to remain as challenging as it is in that landing that first role, because your reputation then sees you land these other opportunities. So when I first joined them in 2015, they were a proprietary trading firm at the time. So I came in to oversee that business essentially. So their model was essentially a pot of capital that we had. It used to be operating in the intraday futures market. We had a top-down kind of macro discretionary approach, and we were very much news-driven traders. So our speciality would be trading around big central bank decisions, speeches, economic data, these types of things. So we used to have a team. They would all, train up, leverage up their size, and they would trade our capital. As we then got further through the timeline to probably 2017, something like that, we actually came across two super talented students at Imperial College London, so one of the top unis in the world. And they were interning at an investment bank. But at the time, they were like, we've got no idea actually what sales trading is, like you've mentioned. Like, what is it? It's like this abstract thing. I read about it on the internet, and people talk about it. I don't actually know what it means, to be honest. And then they came out of their internship with this newfound knowledge. And one happened to be an English guy who was the top in maths at Imperial, first English guy in like 20 years or something. So this kid was good. And the other guy was a German guy, equally as talented. And they basically created the first version of a simulation to mimic sales trading and market making. And it had there's a lot of maths going on in the background, which means that every participant's interaction with every trade that they do, every price order, size order, it influences the other market prices that the participants are seeing. So no one game is the same. So we thought, this is amazing. And actually, what ended up happening is we ended up taking that technology off them. They had their first buyout, let's say, when they were like 19 or something. So credit to them. They're both super successful people today. We then reinvested in that technology again and again and again. And quite quickly, banks started to notice that this is a really good way to initially train their staff, not identify talent. So initially, it was a training tool. We would be able to take on, let's say, new people on a desk, run them through the simulation, and be able to identify what they were good at, what they needed work on, areas of strengths and weaknesses, and so forth. Quite quickly then, from there, you started to say, okay, we could probably move this earlier down the pipeline. And universities were quite interested in terms of how do they make their students more employable? Well, here you go. You can have them experience not just sales trading. How about an entire horizontal category of different roles within banking, markets, quantitative finance, these sorts of things. And so, yeah, we continued to reinvest. We stopped trading completely as a firm, I think probably just before COVID. So fully moved into the ed tech space. We all decided to do that because the way that we traded as a firm, you very much needed to sit in your seat for 12 hours a day. And I don't think me or the co-founders, none of us wanted to do that long term, as fun as it was. There was much more scale in being able to create a business that could truly be global, and we could partner with these firms, and it was technology based. The opportunity was far larger than what we could trade as individuals, I think. So, and we've all come from fairly entrepreneurial backgrounds as well. So there was a collective spirit of, I'd rather run my own thing than sit here and trade. So yeah, now to this very day, we work with clients all over the world. We work with all the business schools from the well-known ones like Oxbridge and LSE to people like Newcastle and Durham and Portsmouth and MIT, Harvard, Duke. So it's been amazing. And what I find most, I guess, exciting about what we do is that we're allowing students to access a lot of what we do for free, which is great because ultimately it's the corporates. It all kind of feeds down. It allows students then at a very early stage to explore careers and truly explore them. I remember when I was really young, I got an opportunity to go and work for 2 days at an accountant's firm. He was my dad's accountant. And I went there and guess what I did? I literally did nothing. I just sat there watching, did nothing. So if someone said to me, do you want to be an accountant? I'd be like, I've got no idea. Like, I don't know what an accountant does, to be honest, even though I've spent 2 days in an accountancy firm. And so think about that from what we do. It's like, right, I never knew, having wanted to be a professional sportsman, that I could have applied the skills that I had to a certain role within finance. My skills I have don't apply to all roles by any means, but one very specific role, which I could do very well. So I think students, rather than just have this superficial understanding, why don't you put them in a seat of, I'm going to give you $100 million and you're going to become the portfolio manager. Not you're going to prepare the PowerPoint deck that I'm going to send to some client. No, you're the MD negotiating the M&A transaction. Like, how can you know you want to do that job unless you're actually doing the job? And then, this is core to what we do. And to be able to then try it and understand, no, I didn't like it. It's absolutely fine. I say this to students all the time. I was like, don't close any door early. Try it and experiment. And that will narrow and refine your search. And that in itself will increase your application likelihood of success because you'll be more motivated and more dedicated and more sure about your fit. And therefore, you can build that whole narrative of your CV, your application, your experiences around that singular focus. So yeah, that's what we do today. And my role very much is, as I said from my background, or you said, very passionate at just demystifying finance. I definitely feel like finance has this artificial barrier. I think you're right. I was in Montreal 2 weeks ago at a PhD researcher conference, and these people are Olympiad mathematics for sure. That's different gravy. But I'd say for majority of roles in finance, quant stuff aside, I think everyone can learn it. I think as long as you've got the right motivation and you have a degree of intellect, nothing is beyond anyone here. And so a lot of my work now on the podcast that I host, or the newsletter, the daily newsletter I do, or the LinkedIn posts, is trying to just demystify, and hopefully then in itself that means that I'm doing my mission personally of trying to make finance accessible for everyone.
I think it's something that's quite interesting about the way that you've built up this business is that alongside that, you've also become one of the biggest voices in finance. And you might be like, oh, I'm not. But just in terms of pure social media followings, in terms of the amount of people that are actually listening to your podcast, the amount of followers you have on LinkedIn, not only because you're good at what you do and your business has grown, but also because of something that you pointed to earlier in the podcast, in which a lot of these incredible people are not actually allowed to post online. I would love to both get your thoughts on what that transition was like from kind of becoming a voice in which you kind of speak to a very select community to kind of becoming, having 75,000 followers on LinkedIn, thousands and thousands of downloads on your podcast, and also whether you think it's a good idea that a lot of banks don't allow the people at those companies to have social media followings.
Yeah, I wish more banks did. I mean, we work with all of these banks and they do often use us as the conduit, if you like, to have that slightly different relationship with the community. I mean, that is part of the role that I serve, I guess. It's almost like, it's almost like I have the ear of the students and I can get on with them. They know that they're somewhat shackled for various different reasons of what they can say. So it does get used in that way. But yeah, I mean, in terms of myself, I would say this thing about authenticity, I think it is important. I mean, I think the word gets overused and can frustrate me sometimes the way people position it. But I think I've seen your posts. I think you're great at this. You talk about your mother, you talk about your lessons learned from that loss and things of that nature, or, I think sometimes trivial things have great lessons. And so it's just about understanding, like, as long as you can be, as your title of this show, personable and connect, all humans have a common thread. When you actually break us down, we're all pretty similar. We have fairly common hopes and desires and ambitions. We're fearful of very similar things. And so, you can kind of gear your content around these themes that can have a broad meaning and impact on a lot of people, but tie it back into the category of finance in that way. I certainly have lent into, as you quite rightly identified, the fact that a lot of people at large institutions are not allowed to talk. So that just opens up a quite clear pathway for me to be a voice that can talk about certain topics. I just read this morning about, for example, Trump talking about the Blackwell chip in part of his trade negotiations, his delegation, and Nvidia shares pop, several percent. I can talk about that like that within 30 seconds. The problem you have, even if you work at Bloomberg or a news media agency, it needs to go through an editorial process. I don't have that. We are small and agile enough as a business, and I am as a person, where I don't need compliance sign off because I am compliance. And so I can kind of say what I want, when I want, and thankfully there's trust in the senior management team that I won't ever overstep the mark or compromise a client or anything like that. But yeah, I think it's something I'm passionate about, certainly on LinkedIn. I think there's definitely a missed trick by a lot of students. It's like the most utilized resource at most students' disposal that could create meaningful shifts in their level of employability, their quest for knowledge, their access to information or people. So yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is something that I spend a lot of time talking to young people about, and I give them literally my framework. And I always say to them, after I go through this whole period of coaching that I give them, I say, look, it sounds like a lot of work. Only maybe 1 or 2% of you will follow the instructions I've given you. And that's the reality of it. We all know how to become certain things, but do we actually exercise the game plan and have the dedication and motivation to do it every single day? That's the difference. And consistency is a big thing when you're trying to build up a community. They need to know that they can rely on you as a relationship would. If you go cold turkey and don't hear from someone, as per a normal human relationship, that relationship starts to fizzle out. So you kind of need to be ever present, and that does put a bit of a burden on you as to how do you manage the flow of content. But that's probably a conversation for another day.
I become friends with this guy called Peter Wood, who's become a top voice on LinkedIn. And he saw a problem in the UK with the UK's unemployment problem, in which a ton of university graduates weren't able to find a job after graduating. And so he started a podcast similar to this, and he would basically just interview people he found interesting about how to find jobs. And I think he did 100 of these or so, built it into a business over 2 years, ended up collaborating with the likes of Google and doing a lot of employment workshops and meetups and things like that, and has built a proper business out of it. The reason I mentioned him is he was saying, any of us, right? Anyone listening to this podcast, I think it'd be pretty cool to go and meet and learn from a CEO of a business. But what we're all probably thinking is, how the hell are you going to do that? You're just going to go walk up to the office and try and, go speak to the CEO? No, you're going to have to go through this person, this person, this person, this person. But he was saying LinkedIn is how he can get in the room with any CEO in the world. And I would completely agree with that statement. If you think of something like Instagram, who spends most of their time on Instagram and how much people consuming of Instagram? If I'm on Instagram Reels, maybe I watch 100 Instagram Reels in a day. Maybe I'm exposing myself there, and I'm not really remembering anything that I've looked at. LinkedIn, the flow of content is much smaller, so a lot of the posts are much stickier. So you might only see 5 to 10 posts in a day. They're more memorable because you actually have to physically read it, and also you can only see one post at a time. So if you see a one post, that level of impact is so much higher. On top of that, because people are on LinkedIn, they have their job title there. It's linked to their full name. You're not hidden behind some username. So the level in which people interact is also higher. So even just to show my own LinkedIn, I'm sure your numbers are 10x mine or something. But just by posting, as you said, kind of top of mind things, my LinkedIn impressions past, I don't know if you can see that, you can't see that, but it says 66,000 impressions in the last 7 days. And you might go, oh, well, Harvey, you've been posting on LinkedIn for a while. I got one of my friends, I made a bet with him. We played paddle tennis 2 weeks ago. And he said, Harvey, if you lose in paddle tennis, you have to post me on LinkedIn. I was like, of course, fine, whatever. I'll work out a post. I was like, fine, but if you lose, you have to post it. He's like, fine. So he does this post, he ChatGPTs the post. He's never posted before. And he gets 8,000 views on this LinkedIn post. I'm pretty sure the 2 other guys we were playing with, both of their bosses saw it, thought it was a great post. The point is, the more you put yourself out there in a proper way, obviously don't ChatGPT what you're saying, the more opportunities you have for success. Hedge funds, VCs, a lot of these incredible funds don't actually have recruitment arms to go about finding incredible people. So when you pop up on their feed, they're suddenly like, oh, James, oh, that's really interesting. Why don't you come work at this firm? So I think the power of that is incredible, and I wanted to add on to that. A few of the topics that you mentioned of importance in terms of young graduates are that of imposter syndrome, resilience, and burnout. And I want to get your perspective on that in a minute. But I think for anyone listening, as well as the broader topics being important, I think the number one question that I would have if I wanted to enter the world of high finance is, how do I do it? How do I get a job? It's hard enough as it is to get a job in high finance, let alone with all of the struggles going on in the broader economy. Maybe that's just a permanent state that we're in. So if you're speaking to someone, 18 to 23 years old that wants to get into finance, what would be your number one piece of advice, and what would you advise them to spend their time doing?
It's probably a combination of things. Starting with the academics. Having good academics makes life easier. So it doesn't make it impossible, but it certainly makes it easier. So the higher academic achievement you have, let's say the better quality university that you can attend, that's just going to make life a bit easier later down the line. And there's people who tactically can use things like summer schools or master's programs in order to build up a resume that can have some of these brand recognitions on it. That's a world which slightly frustrates me, but big financial institutions have so many applications. They've got to filter in some way, shape or form. We're hoping to change that with AmplifyME, slowly but surely. So education is one, I would say. The problem with education is that everyone's got a good education who's applying to these firms. So that's no longer a key differentiator. It probably was when I started my career. You could have come from a really good uni, had a really strong first-class degree. That would have got you in the door. Now that's almost table stakes, I'd say. So what you need next, I would say, is extra things. So extra things, and let's stick with sales and trading because we've talked about that a few times. But you could probably tweak the content that I'll speak about to whichever domain within finance. One thing you could do would be join a finance or trading society at university, but don't just join it. Try and get in as early as possible and get a seat on the committee, or indeed become the president. So when I was at university, I was the president of actually not basketball, the tennis club, because I used to play a lot of tennis as well when I was a kid. So again, it's just another asset to your repertoire, if you like. I can organize people, I can communicate, I can raise funding, all these types of things, these skills. And then it's just about, okay, so what other things can I do? I can go off and seek other certifications. So instead of saying I'm proficient in Excel, I'm going to go and do this financial modeling program with CFI, for example, or Wall Street Prep or AmplifyME. So start building that up. There's charitable work, there's Duke of Edinburgh, so you've got to think, right, how am I presenting myself as a fully well-rounded individual more than just an academic person? Then there's the extra mile that you can go, which is start a podcast. There is write a blog, for example. There is be a consistent poster on LinkedIn. I would say the proportion of students that I meet doing that is probably less than 0.5%. So 0.05%, I'd say, of students do that, meaning that you can easily carve out an edge that way. Now, the great thing about doing blog writing, podcasting, or LinkedIn sharing is you have to follow markets, and then you have to express and be able to articulate your idea. Now you start opening up Pandora's box of becoming financially fluent, being able to converse with people in the industry at the level of which they are operating. Now you have the special sauce. And the special sauce is not only do you have all these, the kind of almost box ticking things on your CV to get through the door, but ultimately and importantly, you have that face-to-face interaction, virtual or in person, and it's quite clear to see that you are definitely motivated by markets, you've got a deep interest, and you know the language because you're immersed in the subject matter. That is the key differentiator, I think, ultimately. So yeah, I think commercial awareness is critical to success. Consuming podcasts, every sell-side institution definitely has almost a divisional podcast. So one in banking, one in markets, one in research, and so forth. Like, you should be devouring that stuff. If you're really, but the problem is, I meet a lot of young people and I go, how much do you want it? And they go, well, I like the idea of working at Goldman Sachs. And you're like, no. How much do you really want it? Are you, every time the Goldman's Markets podcast comes out weekly, or they release the Exchanges podcast, or they release the Top of Mind research report, these are all in the public domain. Tell me about them. What did you read? What did you like about it? And they go, I've never even knew they existed. And you go, so how are you going to get a job in this institution? Or in fact, I go to the corporate earnings of Goldman Sachs, and every quarter, as a publicly listed firm, they put out their financials and individual divisional breakdown. And I say, okay, so what are the three major pillars of the Goldman's business? And they go, it's a good question, I don't actually know. And I go, well, if you were Mr. Goldman Sachs and you were going to hire yourself, and I asked you, what do you know about my business? And you said, well, I can tell you the 4 points of my culture. I'd be like, that's not my question. And you don't even understand my business model or how my business is performing. So why should I hire you? So, it's these sorts of things where I think I'm not criticizing students. I just think students don't really know about these things, or they don't at least know how to find them and utilize them, which is a big part of the help that I generally end up giving them.
I've got a response to that, but I'll save that for another time because we haven't got long left. I want to ask you a few short answer questions just before we close out. The first one being, if you were to go back to when you were 14, 15 years old, would you have done this all again?
Good question. Yes. I mean, I've managed to, I think, land in a place where I get to work with young people, and I'm effectively a coach. And I think if I had freedom of choice, I would be a basketball coach. So I get to kind of itch that scratch in the current role that I have, which is interact with young people and help them reach their potential. And finance has been what's enabled me to have the luxury of being able to have that. What's
a question that you're not often asked enough that you would like people to ask you more?
Good question. Not asked enough. I guess about the realities of work, because people are so much caught in that trap of, well, I'm not going to ask this bank person about how life really is because they're just not going to answer it. I will answer it as best as I can. So I'm here to give people not a reality check, but I think I want young people, I do think about people's well-being and wasted time going down an incorrect path. So I think it's important to be open and honest and give them that insight, and so that they can make more informed decisions for themselves. So I wish people would just take advantage of that from me and just say, look, what are some of the true hard realities of doing this type of line of work? And I'd give them a true answer. And it's not to turn them off, it's just to manage expectations.
And my final question is, what is one thing that you would want a listener to take away from this episode?
I think don't overthink the complexity. You mentioned this yourself about your preparation for the internship and things you're about to do. So don't overcomplicate it in your mind. At the beginning of your career, whether you're in an internship, even as early careers as a grad, no one's expecting you to know a great deal from a technical perspective, because why would you? You're coming out of academia. You might have got a 1 week spring week experience under your belt, followed by another 8 or 9 weeks in a summer internship. You are at the very beginning of an incredibly long journey. So ultimately, if you step back from the coalface, the things to focus on? The things are attitude. Number one, attitude is everything. Like you said, are you coachable? Can you work hard? When you're having a bad day, you're not feeling 100%. Are you there? Are you dependable? Are you accountable? Are you honest? Do you have integrity? All of these things will serve you so well throughout your career. It's just that people, I think, get very distracted, whether it's peer comparison, online representation of what roles look like, by the technical side. So yeah, that's probably the take-home message, is just focus on the fundamentals, and I think you'll do really well.
Thank you very much for coming on today, Anthony. I feel like I've learned a tremendous amount. It's funny, I usually have a load of questions and get through them, but I still have a billion more. So I guess either I'll have to listen to your podcast or get you on in the new year. I feel like there's a lot to be able to take away that from this podcast, not only for new graduates, but something which I hadn't really thought about as much, because there's something about the idea of someone when you look up to someone online. I was actually spoke to a Duke basketball player about this, because Duke's a very big basketball team in the US. And I said, what is something that you wish people understood more about you? And he said, I wish people understood me more instead of the idea of me. And I feel like throughout this podcast, I've been able to understand who you are more than the idea of you, in that, you had this dream of being successful and giving back through service, just like your parents. Your school only had 7% of people going to university. You blew through that barrier. You blew through getting to the finance world, and then you're working with the biggest hedge funds in the world and coming on the Personable podcast. I'm kidding. But so much for speaking.
I've arrived.
It was an absolute honor, and I look forward to staying in touch in the future.
Yeah, all the best, Harvey. And I continue to look out for your good work on LinkedIn, and all the best with the podcast. Thank you.